Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric series, the Unported Playlist, where I take a look at my favorite unported arcade games of all time. And today, if you can't tell already, we're playing KO Drive from Sega. This is actually a prototype of a game that never actually saw a full release. So as far as this being one of my favorites or not is concerned, it definitely isn't, but it's hard to say how much of this game just isn't amazing and how much of it just isn't finished. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, down below hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, I got a Patreon link down below as well. But it's not often we get to talk about a Sega arcade prototype on the channel, but KO Drive is exactly that. Now this was made by Sega of China, the same development team that made Sega Golden Gun, which is basically a Chinese themed pivot on the House of the Dead. And while Golden Gun's an absolutely awesome game that if you've never played, you should definitely check out, KO Drive definitely isn't up to the same quality standard. This game feels half like an amazing game and half like a game that they just weren't quite sure what to do with. Now the courses are going to be different in the game. There's 5 different areas to explore as far as races are concerned, and there's going to be different tracks within each, but every single track is basically comprised of 80% of the original track you play in that environment. And I would say, at least on London here, the layout is fun. It's got some great turns, some amazing drifting and jumps, and it really does feel like an awesome race. But you'll see we're already off of one lap onto the next one, so it feels like this game definitely is supposed to be much smaller than any other Sega arcade racing game. You can complete a race in like 2 minutes, and once you've seen one course, you've basically seen everything it has to offer. So I can 100% understand why Sega of Japan would take a look at this game and say to themselves, you know what, this might not be working out the way we want it to, we should probably just cut our losses and run. But interestingly enough, if you at least believe the internet, there's a few arcade cabinets out there, or were out there, on some cruise ships. It's almost like Sega decided we had 3 or 4 prototypes, we may as well sell them to get used somewhere, make a couple bucks back, and move on with our day. So while you're never going to come across this in an arcade, unless apparently you're on a cruise ship, you can play it today on Techno Pirate, which is a ton of fun, at least from a preservation standpoint, because of course that's not like it actually released to arcades. Now the main conceit here is it's basically half Mario Kart, half an arcade racing game. You're going to get power-ups, you're going to be able to attack your opponents, and you need to do everything in your power to try to get a first place finish. You also see those KO icons. You want to pick those up every race so you can upgrade your car between races. And as we move on to the second course here of Las Vegas, you can definitely tell this game had a sense of humor and charm, at least in some of the courses. If I had to compare this to any game made by Sega as far as the theming would be concerned, it's like Sega Race TV, except nowhere near as good. But honestly, this kind of has a little bit of a Cruisin' USA or Cruisin' Exotica vibe going on as well, because as we come into the casino here, we're not just having a race through the casino, suddenly it turns into an actual roulette wheel at the same time. Honestly, I screwed that drift up there. The controls can be a little bit twitchy, and I think that's just down to the fact that this game again is not finished. It is a prototype, so sometimes it's going to be a little bit buggy, sometimes it's going to do some weird things, and you're going to realize it's the game just basically glitching out and not you just screwing up. But there was definitely a promising game here somewhere. I love the idea of it, taking a Sega racing game and giving it that Mario Kart attack vibe going on. But honestly, the course layout just never worked, although that is the Excalibur there, a casino that's absolutely terrible. I used to have to stay there for work sometimes, but they had a great arcade back in the day, so it'd be fun to see if KO Drive was actually there. I'm sure it's not, but it is a place, at least back in the day, and I'm talking like 18 years ago, had a decent arcade hanging out. But this is one of those games, I'm so glad we're able to play it, even if it isn't the most fun thing in the world to play. In some ways it kind of feels like California Speed as well, except made by Sega, not by somebody like Atari. And Sega of China has put out a couple decent arcade games, but honestly, they're not really doing the exact same caliber of work of somebody like Sega of Japan. That's not a knock on the team there, I'm sure they're definitely less experienced, but if you can make Sega Golden Gun and make it so much fun, it's interesting they weren't able to do the same thing with KO Drive compared to some of Sega's other properties. But I will say it is worth checking out. It does have a fun conceit going on as far as the gameplay is concerned, and it does have a relatively decent soundtrack as well. So I'm going to do a 45-second soundtrack sample, and I'll come back and show you the 3 other courses in the game and explain why this one definitely made sense when it got canceled. But the soundtrack's pretty good, so enjoy that.
3, 2, 1, go! 4 laps left. You drove over the blue. Oh yeah, you did. You drove Looks like I've got lots to learn from you. Time extended. It's showtime.
Fun soundtrack and fun announcer, but the audio balance is definitely off. Some of those clips there are a little bit too loud. While they didn't clip out the audio channels, I did turn down the volume because I found them slightly annoying in Resolve. But it really is hard to say how much of that is just down to the fact that it's a prototype and how much of it is down to the fact that maybe Sega of China had just a little issues on the audio front. But this course here, again, relatively fun, but the big thing about KO Drive is every single course is only like 10 turns and you're right back to the beginning. These courses need to be greatly expanded. Think of every single Sega arcade racing game out there, even if it's lap-based compared to something like Outrun 2, the courses are longer and they're more intriguing, and even though it is fun to drift around the corners here and basically feel like you're racing in the sky, you just need more meat on the bone here, because this game is going to leave you feeling very hungry as you play it. Now you can upgrade your vehicle in between races with those KO icons you get. You can increase the turbo, you can increase the attacks, but honestly, it doesn't really feel like it does that much of anything, and honestly, sometimes the drift feels like it's absolutely perfect, other times it feels like the drift causes your car to actually slow down way too much. I'm not sure why that is. Again, it is really hard when you're talking about prototypes to know what was bad game design and to know what was unfinished game design, because you can't really strike a prototype for not being complete, because that's exactly what it is, an incomplete version of a game concept. But you don't get a ton of arcade prototypes out there. If you think of handhelds or home consoles, prototypes are absolutely everywhere in the development process. You can download them and check them out. But on the arcade side of things, it is quite rare that a prototype game that never actually saw a release ends up being able to be playable, so I do love it from that preservation standpoint. Now moving over to the first course in the game, Canada, this is where the game clearly feels unfinished, and why I would assume Sega of Japan would just say, this isn't working out, we're going to cancel it. This is one of the most boring courses I've ever played in any arcade racing game, whether it's made by Sega or any other developer. You have like 4 turns and it basically feels like Baby Part from Mario Kart, except in all of the worst ways, none of the fun ways. There just really isn't that much to see and do. Now the question is, did they not populate everything here? Was just this a temp track trying to get the engine running, or is this actually a course they had decided would be good for the game? Because you'll see, we're already back to where we started. We've taken 3 right-hand turns, and don't get me wrong, turning the same direction every single lap can be fun like in Daytona USA, but KO Drive is definitely not anywhere near the quality of something like Daytona USA or any other Sega game, so I could see why they wouldn't want to release this one and put the Sega name on it. It just wouldn't really live up to anything Sega had done before, and honestly companies like Sega and every other developer out there want to protect their reputation. They don't want to put the Sega name and a Sega brand on something like an inferior arcade racer, especially when they are known for making some of the best arcade racing games of all time. So if I was sitting around the boardroom table at Sega of Japan when they talked about whether or not they should finish this game or just basically kill it, release a couple test cabinets of some cruise ships apparently just to recoup a couple bucks and move on with their day, I would 100% vote in the affirmative that this one should have been cancelled. I'm not saying there isn't fun to be had here, and I'm not saying that it couldn't have ended up being a good game, but there was very little here that made you think that they would be successful if they finished it. But one more soundtrack sample, 35 seconds, and I'll come back and tell you a little bit more about the history of the game. But enjoy.
3, 2, 1, go! 3 laps left. Neutral of the green. Oh yeah, did it!
You may notice that there's a little bit of visual glitch there where the actual KO Drive icon is going to be in the left hand corner of the screen. That's just a techno-parrot thing about resolutions. But again, you can play this game today, you can experience it, and you can check it out. Leave me a comment down below and you tell me, did you even know KO Drive ever existed? I want to assume the large majority of commenters this week are going to say they didn't know this game was out there or in development, but I'm assuming most people would probably agree and say there really isn't anything here that feels like it would have been an amazing game had it launched. But the fun part is preservation isn't always about fun. Sometimes it's just about keeping these games alive, even if they aren't the best games out there. KO Drive had a good idea, just unfortunately didn't execute on any of those ideas. The courses are definitely unfinished and they aren't that much fun. The overall battle mechanic is definitely weak and not a great time. And as far as the graphics are concerned, they are definitely just C tier. But considering Sega of China made Sega Golden Gun a 10 out of 10 game that you probably haven't played, it is surprising they also made KO Drive something that I feel like they just never actually figured out what type of game they were trying to make. Felt like they were trying to be different than every other Sega arcade racing game out there to have their own identity, but sometimes you have to remember Sega is so beloved for arcade racing games because they stick to a tried and true formula, and KO Drive deviated from that and ended up suffering because of it. But if you want to check this one out today, you can play it on Techno Parrot if you feel like checking it out. But we're done and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.